Ukraine has succeeded in restoring its food exports to the pre-war level. It did so even though it lost lots of lands occupied by Russia. Many fertile lands have been turned into a war zone, have been mined, or are under shelling. Ukraine lost several of its top ports to Russia, and the Black Sea navigation continues to be threatened by the Russian strikes. Despite all this, Ukraine has again shown its miraculous capacity to produce and export food globally. You're listening to the Explaining Ukraine podcast. Explaining Ukraine is a podcast by UkraineWorld, a multilingual media about Ukraine. My name is Volodymyr Yermolenko. I'm a Ukrainian philosopher, chief editor of UkraineWorld and president of PEN Ukraine. My guest today is Taras Kachka, Ukraine's deputy economics minister and the country's trade representative. I invite Taras to discuss how the war influences Ukraine's economy and trade, and how Ukraine continues to resist. UkraineWorld is brought to you by Internews Ukraine, one of the largest Ukrainian media NGOs. You can support us at patreon.com/UkraineWorld. We provide exclusive content for our patrons. You can also support our volunteer trips to the front lines at PayPal, Ukraine.resisting@gmail.com. You can find these links in the description of this episode. So, let's start. Taras Kachka, welcome to this podcast.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining this conversation, and we are going to talk about the issues related to trade during the war, Ukrainian trade, Ukrainian economy, whether Ukrainian economy is surviving this war, because obviously it's a very difficult thing. And let's talk about these issues. I remember we were talking with you in 2022 when Ukraine was not able to export its production through the Black Sea, and all the major ports were blocked. And you were explaining to us, to UkraineWorld, the sense of this grain deal. What is happening now?
So now we have a totally different environment. So we have our seaports unblocked, so that not free ports of Odesa, so deep ports are operating quite well, and with no restraints due to security achievements or to security guarantees by Ukrainian army, so that with proper protection of anti-missile protection, and it is extreme proof of necessity of having freedom of navigation for economic purposes. So what happened in modern world is that basic freedoms related, so that were developed in 19th century or 18th century, so they went so deep into, let's say, bureaucracy or hierarchy of rules or principles that people forgot about them. So that for Ukraine, so freedom of navigation was basic or cornerstone of our economic stability, economic resilience, because everyone understood so that without freedom of navigation you cannot send neither corn or wheat to Africa, nor steel products to Middle East or to Europe. And that's why now we see that the interest to freedom of navigation is reappearing on the agenda of all nations. And I think that Ukrainian case will be very important to indicate that we cannot take for granted something that is very, very basic. So that's why what happens in Southeast Asia with sea routes, with tensions there. So it's all part of the same discussion. So how we should treat freedom of navigation, and Ukraine is there. But this is something global, something abstract. But in daily routine, what we see is that monthly we restored our export in terms of volume to the level of pre-war, so that we had a record of 13 million tons of goods in May. Now we classically have a possibility to export more than 10 million tons. Majority of these goods are going through sea routes from seaports of Odesa, so three of them. But as well, we have like new dimension of land routes to the European Union, and very particular partnership with Romania, with Port of Constanța, and a lot of people think that this is something technical, but in my opinion, this is like new reality in the Black Sea. So how cooperation of two states that produce agricultural commodities and have the deep seaports on their coasts combine their efforts and work together in the region and have a better implication or better, let's say, bargaining position in the region.
You said that Ukraine restored its trade flows compared to the pre-war level, but we lost so many things. We lost Mariupol as a port, we lost Berdyansk, we lost many other ports. 20% of the territory is occupied. Most of it, if you take the south of Zaporizhia region, Kherson region, Donetsk region, are very fertile lands. And right now, I've been recently several months ago, to the places where the counteroffensive was going on, on the crossroads between Zaporizhia and Donetsk region, the famous New Greece, and I just saw this black soil there. It's the most black land that I've ever seen, and people say that this is the most fertile lands on earth. So these fertile lands are actually either occupied, or there is a front line, or they are mined. So how Ukraine succeeded to restore this pre-war capacity?
You perfectly described the tragedy of Black Sea region, because it's interesting that Black Sea, northern part of Black Sea, was a source of grain and wheat for ages. Yeah, so starting from ancient ages, Athens and Sparta, and their discussion about where to buy wheat, and now as well. So that I was recently in Beirut in Lebanon, and for them as well. So that Black Sea wheat is let's say the cornerstone of their food security. What they consume and what they sell in the region as well, so in nearest states. And we have several problems with so that our arable lands, Ukrainian arable lands, first of all, the occupied territories, so that what Russia is trying to do is trying to sell this Ukrainian wheat, or wheat produced in Ukrainian soil, as Russian wheat. And for us, this is a no-go, and definitely we quite successfully oppose the attempts of, let's say, of legalizing this wheat in Russian Russian balances, because Russia is nominally the biggest producer of wheat, but the consumption of wheat or purchasing of Russian wheat in the world is shrinking, because people don't want to work with them due to sanctions, due to their image, due to the way how their market is organized. And as well, now we see that all the let's say stolen wheat, so that wheat from occupied territories, can be sold only on very black market, and it is a priori criminal activity. And for us, this is success, because no one actually treat that. We don't care whether Melitopol is under Russian occupation or under Ukrainian control. We will purchase wheat from that region. This is first one. Second big thing is demining. For demining, I think that for Ukraine now is the, let's say, biggest market for demining. So that I think that more than 80% of all demining activity globally takes place in Ukraine. Why? Because our farmers that survived, I think, that all possible challenges in their understanding, it is their task, it is their energy that need to be used for demining. So that's why a lot of companies, they invest their own money for technical, non-technical survey and actual demining. And even Nibulon, our biggest biggest company, biggest company, trading company, so that lost a lot in Mykolaiv because it was the center of its activity was in Mykolaiv. Now has,
but also in Kherson region, I remember.
yeah. So that so it's south, yeah. So that's but so Mykolaiv was their like core place for transshipment and sending grain abroad. But now they have demining operator. So it's Nibulon demining. So it's officially so that, and this is the example how our farmers actually treat arable land, that this is their responsibility, they want to invest their money. Of course, this is additional costs, so that means that the cost of production is even worse, so that higher. Ukrainian government compensate partially so that the cost of demining, we encourage all demining operators from all the world to come to Ukraine and be active here. And in last year, we verified whether the area is mined or not mined, whether it is contaminated or not contaminated, several hundred thousand of hectares. But we calculated that it allowed to produce another 1 million ton of wheat. So that's the scale is quite huge. Of course, the not all lands are actually mined, so that they are potentially contaminated. So you need to have people who verify whether there is actual contamination or not. And this is absolutely like very big universe. And what is important for us is that we need operators from all the world. We need a lot of equipment to do this as fast as possible, because we don't want to spend another ages for not using the arable land that can be used for supply of supply of food to the vulnerable societies in Africa or in the Middle East.
For our listeners, I can just say that, well, what Taras is saying, that the food security of many countries depend on Ukraine. But as we are traveling a lot on frontline areas, just maybe a couple of weeks ago, we went to the south, to the Zaporizhia region, to the famous places of Nestor Makhno, the Ukrainian anarchist. So Hulai is his capital, but it is now the front line. But there are other villages and towns that we visited, and you understand that you're like 10, 15 kilometers from the front line. But all the fields are cultivated.
Yes,
and it's really remarkable. Although the security situation is very dangerous, people are saying about shelling every day. There is something flying over their heads, but you cannot see just abundant land, abundant fields.
Yeah, this is this example, the example of demining, the example of how our farmers exported grain in 2022 when seaports were blocked. So that these set of examples indicate that Ukrainian agriculture is extremely resilient. This is very bureaucratic word, resilient, but it is true that all available arable land, even on front line, will be cultivated despite the costs. Because it's not only security issue, but it's also a costs. Because after all, it is more expensive to go to sowing campaign, planting campaign, and selling these goods. The prices went down quite considerably last year. So that's why our farmers also under pressure from logistics, that the prices on our domestic market are lower than in international market. So that's why our farmers what they're doing is that they are, they are rational to the level of economics. That it means that that the science of economics shows that people are rational. So, but we know that people are irrational. So that's why our farmers are at the level of rationality as like in textbooks. So that it means that this is something enormous.
So Chicago theory works during the war.
Yeah, but this is personal choice of Ukrainian farmers, and this is something incredible. So something that is very rational, in reality, is very emotional, because you just admire what people are doing.
Of course, there are forces that helped Ukraine to resist. First, let me ask, you already mentioned that the fact that Ukraine exports through the Black Sea, is partially thanks to Romania, a EU member state, and partially thanks to our own military effort. So the fact that Ukrainians are capable, without even having a fleet, but are capable to shoot at Russian ships in the Black Sea, and basically Ukrainians carved that corridor in the Black Sea by the military means. Is that what you're saying? Or this grain deal, we remember this trilateral, two trilateral formats, Ukraine, UN, Turkey, Russia, it worked?
I will reply to all the questions you asked. So I think that we managed to use all possibilities for export of Ukrainian goods in 2022 when everything was blocked. So you know that in February 24th, so that's the first day of war, there were several vessels that left seaports without papers, without customs papers and everything else, because there was a bet that for them, so despite the risks, they will leave, and then it was an exercise for us to ensure that they have all papers issued. And at the same day, the pressure on railways and truck, so roads in bordering with Poland, with all our neighbors, increased drastically as well. So there was no pause on exporting of Ukrainian goods. So that from the very first day, it was clear that we will use every opportunity. So but at the same time, we have. Now in like 2.5 years, we have an experience that this pressure can be perceived or in different ways. So in case of Romania, it resulted in creation of very strong partnerships, so that with increasing the capacity of Constanța, good understanding between railways, developing of trade in Danube Delta, so that the river shipment by barges increased. We resolved a lot of issues that have been on agenda for many years between Ukraine and Romania. And Romania was usually in eyes of ordinary citizen is rather distant neighbor, yeah. So that's not like Poland. And in case of Poland, it was otherwise. So that in case of Poland, so that's even not so big increase of actual trade flow was perceived as a tsunami. So that's as a tsunami that destroys Polish agriculture, and it resulted in very strange situation, because after all, now when situation has changed, Ukrainian exporters left that trade route, and now we see articles in Polish press, the same media that criticized Polish government for not blocking Ukrainian grain. Now they have articles that Polish seaports are half empty because no one actually transported grain through Poland. So the results could be different, and this is a very big lessons for us. Lesson for us that, you know, sometimes the psychological things, the perception, the mood is more important than your cold rational approach. Because when we approached Polish colleagues and said that you see that from rational point of view we see no damage to you, and they said that rationally maybe we understand you, but we have farmers who are protesting and they're emotional. Yeah, so no one says irrational but emotional. So it means that you are dealing with something that is about perception, about fears, about manipulation sometimes. This is big lessons for our future relations with the European Union. In case of corridor with Russia, this is another lesson that is important for general security understanding, because now we see that a lot of people in the United States or in leaders of, let's say, global South, like South Africa or Brazil or India, they think in terms of let's say deals or arbitrages or intermediary support, etc., etc. And in this regard, we need to look carefully what happens with Black Sea Grain Initiative. It was a relief for us since it was clear that the land corridors in 2022 were not capable to, so that they are not big enough to export all the harvest we have, all yields. So that's why for us to open the Black Sea navigation was really important. We had good deal makers, so Turkey and the United Nations. So the deal was really like brokered in good faith, and it's like a model. And recently, President Zelensky said that this model can be used for broader understanding. Yeah, so that's and indeed it worked quite well in the first 6 months of the initiative, but then it was clear for Russia that the increase of export from Ukraine creates more competition for Russia, or someone decided to profit, like corrupted officer in inspections, or there was a political decision. So, but what Russia did, so that after all, it decided that if she had an opportunity to put a pressure or to sabotage Ukrainian efforts, it will do it, even within brokered arrangements. So what they did, they decreased up to, let's say, very minimal level the number of inspection of vessels. It was quite interesting in terms for us in terms of how market reacted, because market reacted in a way that if there is a big vessel, it is still more efficient to wait for another month in a queue before Russia inspected your vessel than to go with small shipments through Romania or Poland. But this is rather about efficiency of agriculture. But from political point of view, it is clear that any brokerage with Russia that provides Russia with certain rights or possibilities to put a pressure or to sabotage the model, it will be used. It's so clear that if you want to have an arrangement with like brokered with intermediaries, it should be constructed in a way when Russia has no possibility to block it or to sabotage it, because you know that no one is going into details. That everyone said, okay, Russia with its grace. So it was quite interesting because you know Alain Pelé, so that the lawyer, so who is now actually criticizing Putin, but he was on Russia's side in International Court of Justice, and they told us in case that we need to wait for grace of Russia in communications and or in their position on different things. So but this grace is accepted by someone as something good, so that they actually did something good for the general, for the global world, for food security, but then you are not following details, and when the news is quite good for Russia image, but then the reality is that everything is sabotaged, and all situation with food security, with this Black Sea grain initiative, and generally with blockade of Russia, actually shows that the one of big exporters of wheat is actually playing Hunger Games, trying to politically put a pressure on African states, saying if you are with us, we will sell you wheat. If no, we will block purchase of wheat from Ukraine. And it is quite impressive weapon, because only in Africa we have more than 30 states that depends on supply of wheat from Black Sea. It is either Russia or Ukraine. And that's why Russia's approach is absolutely like new standards in humanitarian law. So it is not related to trade, but in humanitarian law, you know that the hunger is also always used in connection with sieges. So if you siege Odesa or Mariupol, you cannot actually lead to hunger in the siege city. So it was the rule from very old time in rules of war. But now it appeared that the blockade of Odesa actually created hunger somewhere in third places, in Africa or in Bangladesh, and this is new, like, universal weapon. It's like nuclear weapon, so that with very unpredicted results. So that's why when we shifted to freedom of navigation guaranteed by Ukrainian armed forces with anti-missile system, it actually created more safe environment. So it was quite interesting because initially the global markets, they said that without Russia in the deal, we will not believe that this navigation is safe. But then, after all these lessons with Russian sabotage, etc., now it is clear that the security guaranteed by Ukraine is safer and is more predictable, because no one is blocking your vessel for a month or two, waiting in Bosphorus for inspection. So that's why even for global commercial world changed its mind. So that's why I think that this is a very big victory for Ukraine.
But it's also bad news for the world, because it means that Ukraine was able to ensure it with military means, but nobody was able to ensure it with international law, right?
Yeah. Oh, you jumped into very philosophical things. Yeah, yes, indeed, it is true. But the question is, the international law, especially in trade, let's say, dimension, is rather. It is not. It is not so strong as like something very imperative, like domestic law. But I think that every international lawyer starts with this, let's say, caveat. Yeah, so that's. I think that what is important is to understand that the principles that are important for your trade, even if you are far from the actual war, somewhere in Latin America, for example, so that they need to be defended with weapon. Because you know that if I was in Chile recently, so if in Chile you have freedom of navigation from all your seaports in Pacific, and you can develop your export, you can develop import, industrial cooperation, all the things that are related to economic development, maybe you don't care about this principle of freedom of navigation, but in certain moment you need to defend this principle, because it is important for Ukraine, because it was a matter of life or death, but it is as well important for the very distant states. So that's why international law need to be defended. So that this is the lesson. So it is not like something that is so that it is clear per se, so that's okay, we have rules, but these rules can be like covered by dust if you do not protect them. So this is what actually the European Union is trying to do, to protect the principles of World Trade Organizations, of international trade law, while China is having different views on this, or the United States, all spectrum of political parties have different views on these basic rules. But in our case, it is not only diplomatic protection, it's not only promotion, it's not only convincing. This is the actual protection of these principles by army, by weapon.
Yeah, the question of who implements international law, right? There is no international police to do it, so it's a big question. Let me ask you about European Union. You already touched this topic, and it's very important. So we went through a very, very difficult crisis with Poland, and maybe it's going to come back, and not only with Poland, by the way. And the big question is, as far as I understand the situation, European Union in the first time after the full-scale war started, it tried to help Ukraine with exports, and therefore it created much better conditions than what we have under association and free trade agreement. Can we say that these conditions are actually close to those conditions that will be when Ukraine joins the European Union, meaning that trade with no restrictions, no tariffs, no tariffs quotas, etc.? And if yes, is the Polish farmers' reaction to it a kind of a forecast of what will happen when Ukraine actually joins the European Union and will have, unlimited access to the EU market?
This is the question that will be in the core of all discussions about Ukrainian integration of Ukraine to the European Union. And for us, it was a mistake, I think. We need to be clear. It was a mistake to be in our behavior towards Polish farmers as well, since we tried to be very rational. So that we tried to explain that in reality what happened is that Ukraine didn't increase the import of goods to the EU, so that from Lublin to Lisbon, but we increased the import through Lublin, not through Barcelona or not through Porto or Lisbon. So that and indeed, so that in 2022 we exported to the European Union the same amount of corn as 3 years before.
So EU was just used as a kind of a bridge to export to the wider world.
No, it was like the Ukraine already is a very strong element of feed basis of EU agriculture, animal agriculture. So that the joke that Spanish jamon is made from Ukrainian corn is not a joke. So that Spain indeed that increases consumption of Ukrainian corn. It increases consumption of Ukrainian wheat. The same with Italy. Of course, there were certain fluctuations in German market, but this is rather advanced thinking. So that because we try to understand where was the actual clash. So that's the actual impact on prices that actually resulted in things in reaction of Polish farmers. But this rational approach doesn't work, because we tried for a year. We tried to explain the custom statistics, the actual trade flows, the consumption, so that we tried to also to use the presentations of Polish Ministry of Agriculture when they said that 2022 was best for increase of export of Polish dairy, meat, and other animal origin goods from Poland to other third states within the EU, to Germany, Netherlands, but also outside of the EU. And it was a result of access to Ukrainian corn as well, and all these things. So, and I heard even from very high level politician in Poland that, yes, you are right, but it's about elections, so I don't care. So that's it's about emotions, it's about getting votes, and so on. So that's why for us, the key task is to continue to be rational, but as well to convince the European Union that Ukraine is a part of solution of all challenges of the European Union. Because it's not only Ukraine that is fear for EU farmers, but also Green Deal, but also their competitiveness around the globe, because the EU is even bigger exporter of agricultural goods. Also, the EU has very specific approach to agriculture, because for the EU, it's in the Treaty on Functioning of European Union that agriculture is not only economic policy, but also social policy. That for the EU, it is important to maintain the, let's say, big number of people living in rural area and doing farming. So not only like you or me just have some small house in village, just for writing something. So that for the EU, it is important that there are small farmers, whatever price for maintaining of their activity. This is social implication. And Ukraine is a solution for all these things, so that with Ukrainian supply of grains to EU farmers, they can be competitive in terms of price and on global world. So because the cost of production is easier, so the volume, the quality, etc. So it is as well possible to deal with food inflation. So if the prices for eggs are jumping, or like with sugar, so that what happened with sugar. So the prices for sugar jumped in the EU like 3 times, so like from 250 US dollars to like more than 800 euros, and it immediately transfers into the price of everything with sugar, so that candies, everything, yeah. And that's why Ukraine started to produce sugar to satisfy this demand. So it was not produced before 2022, so that we started to produce it. And indeed we increased the export from like it was like 25 times. It's incredible increase. Yeah, so that's something very, very enormous. But the reason why we did it, we tried to help the EU to have this balance to access to sugar for consumers. It's also business consumers and people as well. So that's why it also indicates that Ukraine is a part of solution. It's not only like a challenge for them, it's also part of solution, especially when the EU wants to develop really, let's say, careful policy. For example, they want to block import of products that are produced from from deforested lands. Ukraine is not deforesting land in order to produce agricultural products. No, neither soya beans, no sunflower seeds, or wheat or corn. So that's why if they want to, so if EU farmers, or let's say EU wants to pursue the policy of not accepted the agricultural products that are produced with barbaric methods. So Ukraine is a solution here, so that we can actually balance the potential deficits of certain products if they are cut out from EU markets. But it requires a big diplomacy on convincing that it happens. So that's in future, and that we are rather friends and support each other and not competitors. So it will take many years, a lot of discussions, boring discussions about fertility of lands, about the microeconomy of production of every product, and social standards in small farming, etc. So a lot of things, and it will be really a core element in our discussion on accession to the European Union.
One thought that I hear in the European Union, people are saying, look, it's obvious that Ukraine is an agricultural superpower, and therefore it challenges all those farmers. And what you say, it's very important for the EU, farmers in France, for farmers in Poland. It's very important that people stay in the lands, and Ukraine is challenging that. And therefore, while Ukraine will be, going through this process of negotiations for EU membership, we need to tell to EU citizens that Ukraine will not benefit from the common agricultural policy, because, as we know, common agricultural policy is a way by the EU also to protect farmers socially and economically. What would you say to this?
You see that in reality, I prefer not to say. So that's it's because it is very sensitive topic, which requires good discussion, but everything you say will be used like in opposite way, because the discussion is very complex. I think that from the EU side, from EU farmers side, we still in lobbying and jar dimension, so that to defend your own interest. And sometimes it is not really fair. So that I will explain how it works. We talked. So you mentioned common agricultural policy, small farmers. That we challenge that Ukraine is a challenge for small farmers. But why the EU Association of Farmers defended the products that are produced by big industrial corporations like eggs or poultry? So poultry is not produced by small farmer, and eggs are not produced by small farmers. They are produced by big industrial entities in the EU and in Ukraine as well. So no one is hiding this, but they are equal. So they are maybe competitor on third markets, and that's why we still need to convince our friends in Kachka, the biggest association of EU farmers, that please stop thinking in this lobbying manner, so that you have a client like EU producer of eggs that try to squeeze Ukrainian eggs by any price, and by designing this reasoning like that Ukraine is big, the cost of production is very low in comparison with the EU, that Ukrainian products are not in line with EU standards and all these things, and because then it was produced in many things, and now we have all these prejudice formed in public debate. But then we start to explain that, start to clarify, but which standards we are not compliant. Ukrainian products are compliant with EU standards, because otherwise they would not appear on the EU market. So that EU is defending the quality of goods that are supplied there. So that's why what you are talking about. Oh well, so we have more sophisticated rules in the EU. So and we're still trying to find these more sophisticated rules. And it is not. And all I said here is not an attempt to say that they are wrong and we are right. It's just like we need to have a different discussion. And different discussion is that whether we can live together in one single market, in one common agricultural policy, and be an agricultural leader of the world. Because Ukraine is a superpower, and the EU as well. So that the EU is even stronger superpower in agriculture in global world. So together we can be really like dominant in global world. So that's why this discussion should be really profound. And common agricultural policy is only one element of this, because in the EU there are producers who lives out of common agricultural policy because they think that they can be more efficient and more profitable if they are not within this bureaucracy of subsidies. But for small farmers, indeed, there should be a solution. And the question is that or the real situation is that Ukraine cannot decide on the way how small farmers should be supported in the European Union. So that we need to do this together, because we need to understand what is the goal of EU for maintaining this, for promoting this social part of agricultural policy. Whether it should be increased further, whether it should be endless, or whether it should be critically reassessed, and that will lead to certain increase of this the area for farmers. It means that people would live as well. So, of course, you know that everything that will be critically changed within common agricultural policy, there is a high risk that it will be connected to Ukraine, so that it was done because, so let's speculate, like in 3 years, the EU will decide to modernize common agricultural policy and will say that we will provide less subsidies for very small farmers, so that only for those that are economically viable, we will provide some subsidies. And people in their mind, they will say, okay, they are trying, so that these bureaucrats in Brussels, they try to prepare everything for accession of Ukraine. And that's why we will receive less money. Let's go to Brussels and let's protest. Let's bring manure there and all the things that we saw this spring in Brussels. It may happen, and in my understanding, it will happen with this high probability it will happen. But this is the reality of discussion. So that this is very complex discussion with many stakeholders, and I think that the biggest, let's say, lesson for us that this task is more complex in comparison with more sophisticated strategies of promoting our interests. So that we still need to learn, to prepare, to develop this discussion.
Let's talk about Ukrainian economy in general, because we focus so much on agriculture. I know that you know perfectly well Ukrainian agriculture, but there are other sectors. And what, in your opinion, what's happening with the Ukrainian economy during the war? Because I often hear the figure that half of Ukrainian budget is actually insured by the foreign donations right now. And if we keep this pace as it is, it's not sustainable. Ukraine, and at the same time, Ukraine needs to spend so much money on the military. It's a huge amount of money, and so much money on renovating what has been damaged by Russia, starting from buildings and ending with energy infrastructure. We are now living through huge electricity cuts, and nobody knows what will happen in winter. And do you see any prospects that Ukraine, despite the war, goes onto this sustainable track, that it is at least less dependent on foreign aid?
Definitely, definitely we see this scenario. So the issue is that how all society see the prospects of Ukrainian economy. Definitely, so that for us, the need for financial support from our partners will be mid-term or even long-term. So that it is difficult to imagine that we can recover without financial support of our partners, and but it doesn't mean that we will need money, that direct support to our budget, like it happens this year. So like in 5 years, so that when the war is over, so that then I think that this financial support will transformed into the financing of infrastructural projects by international financial institutions or commercial entities. So, and we see that there is a big enthusiasm in Western world on projects for economic recovery of Ukraine. So that's why I believe that it will be so that the general scenario in long term is quite optimistic. The same in terms of financial support. Yeah. So because there are a lot of implications in your questions again. So that a part of budget, there is a real economy. Real economy is so that as GDP, so that it shrinked for 30% in 2022. Now it's recovering, so that it's like plus the first half of 2024, it was plus 4.1% of growth of GDP. So that the reason for this, like three reasons for this. So that first is financial support of our partners and maintaining of macro financial stability. So macro financial stability, it means that our budget has money, and our National Bank of Ukraine is also, and banking system is stable. Second is that within GDP, the governmental part, so including army, is increasing, so that this defense industry, so army itself is also creating a GDP. So that's why it's not only so the army defends us, and at the same time also a part of economic engine because of supply of food to army, supply of weapons, supply of munition, and everything else. Fuel, all kind of supplies, and the salaries for soldiers that they spend, like in Ukrainian economy. So it's also drive the GDP. So I think that we all want to, let's say, that this pattern is over, so that we have peace, we have victory, and all people are rather integrating into peaceful life than continue to be soldiers on front line. But at this time, so that we see that this engine of economy is operating. So we do not have that separation of army from let's say from society and from private companies, and we are trying to improve cooperation so that more, let's say, open public procurements, great involvement of local producers to supply of all the stuff to army, etc. And the third element of economic growth is this absolutely marvelous optimism of Ukrainian business. So that you see in not only in Kyiv, but also it is everywhere, that despite all problems with electricity, all systems are operating. Banks are operating, so postal services and everything. So we there is no like collapse in any industry. Even for steel industry, which is really damaged by by the fact that Mariupol is destroyed. Even there, so they lost 3/4 of their capacity in 2022. But now, from this, let's say, lowest point, they increase their production by 10% this year and increasing export and restoring exports. And I'm glad that it happens and how they work. Of course, we see that what I see and what is important is that Ukrainian companies, they see that one of the biggest, or let's say the best way to survive and to modernize is to integrate with Western partners. So that's to supply spare parts to them, or to provide software or R&D or raw materials to EU companies. This trend is still like not so visible like restoration of export of Ukrainian agriculture, because it's like million tons and billions of US dollars, but it is quite strong. So that's why I think that all the steps that are made by Ukrainian producers, that are combine their efforts with Danish producers, Czech producers, Romanian, Polish, it will result in greater industrial integration and will speed up our integration to the European Union. But at the same time, if war will continue with the same tempo of destruction, then we will have a lot of challenges with human capital, so nominally with human capital, because I think that so we are saying that the best people are dying at frontline, and I agree with this, but it doesn't mean that people who live in like say safe parts of Ukraine, they are bad ones. So they are good ones. So, but maybe we will need more. So, but definitely we will need more efforts in terms of training them, in terms of developing their skills. So that's and other efforts to decrease the deficit of human capital for our producers. Of course, the energy is a great challenge now. It's so that the problems will be here for several years, but no one is going to give up. Yeah, so that's also like good news. So that's why, despite all the challenges, I think that the real optimistic, real optimism of Ukrainian business is higher than the, let's say, figures in the indexes, because these figures in indexes are compared with peaceful times, so before 2022, or relatively peaceful time, before 2022. But within these very tough military environments, with all attacks and destructions, I see that people are not giving up, and this is something that is the best thing to be promoted for future investments to Ukraine. So that's why I am optimistic about the future of Ukrainian economy. But being optimistic, you need to be very sober in terms of dealing with crises you have now.
Thank you. We will end on this optimistic note for our general public, and I will ask one more question for our patrons. The global economy, and including Russia. So there was an illusion in Ukraine that the West is so powerful that it can impose sanctions on Russia and Russian economy will collapse. Now we see that Russian economy is doing well. It found other markets. It's much more now oriented towards the Pacific, towards China, India, and other countries. Does it mean that we are going to this big restructuring of the global economy, and basically we are losing any, tools to influence Russia economically, so that it does not finance war effort anymore, or it's just that the West is not doing enough?
In our eyes, West is not doing enough. So it's like it's not my official position. I think that's what we want from West, that the sanctions should cut out Russia immediately from global economy. and this, so it is clear that we want this, so that this anticipation is absolutely legitimized. We want our enemy to be punished here and now. I think that what is happening in the global world is an attempt to avoid destruction of globalization, because globalization profits everyone. So globalization profits China, the United States, the European Union, Brazil, India. So they all, even Ukraine. So that for us, we are export-oriented economy. We want this globalization operate, so that with freedom of navigation is a big foundation of this. What this geoeconomic competition between the EU, China, and the United States touches only the, let's say, certain sensitive elements of their big economic engine. So no one in the United States said that we need to cut all economic ties with China, and the same with the European Union. And that's why there is a fear to cut Russia from the world, because it can be a start of like an ice age. Yeah, so it can be a start of the collapse of global world. So that's why for us we need also to be persuasive but patient in terms of continuing the pressure on Russia. So that's and as well to think together with Western partners on how to ensure that the global economy operates, and as well cut those who are destroying this economy, so namely Russia, from this economy. So this is not an easy task. So, but it's interesting, not an easy task. I read a book about the origin of economic sanctions in First World War, in modern world, in First World War, and it was so that it started as a very mild policy, but in 1918 it was very tough policy with, let's say, statistical cut of supply of strategic materials from United Kingdom, so the British Empire, to the rest of the world. So that's why I think that if so that in, let's say, in longer term, so there will be more and more pressure on Russia. But everyone wants to be inaccurate, because the economy is very complicated. So it's not like, when you simplify, you can say, oh, the EU doesn't want to cut relations with Russia, but they cut, so that they cut the dependence from Russian gas. Of course, we are still not satisfied that that Russia supplies some iron ore or sort of steel material, so that's to the EU, but as well the problem is defined that we need to squeeze it. The biggest problem for us is I think that the supply of the spare parts for missiles and the chips for missiles, and here I think that there is no other solution than just to stop export to any state that re-export, and we are on this on the way to this. So now we have a phase when all third states that were involved in re-exporting, so that US chips to Russia, so they're in the process of, let's say, consultations. But if these consultations will not be successful, then there will be no other choice than to cut export, for example, to China. So that, or to other states, I would not name, because they are trying to do something. Yeah, so that so I think that we need also to take into account how global economy is evolving, so that it is really it is not, so that what is most sensitive for us is that you and me, we are like people from 80s, yeah, so, or like children of 80s, when it was an idea of open world, global world, everyone is profiting. But then so now in 30 years, we see that there is growing inequality within rich nations and between nations, growing competition, because everyone used to have this, let's say, division of developed world and developing world. So some developing nations are going to competing with developed nations, but still don't want to treat them as developed. And this is also a part of global evolution of the world, and we are in the middle of this. So that's why this story is very it's like contemporary art, yeah. So it does not fall into the logic of catalogazak, so that's really well structured genres of art in previous decades or centuries. So this is something new evolving. And for us, this is not a challenge because Ukraine as well is a player in this. So that our approach to defend ourselves is very unique. So that's why we have this phenomenon of Zelensky, we have a phenomenon of Ukraine, and our, let's say, non-traditional approaches to diplomacy, etc. Someone criticizes this, others admire this approach, but this is also our attempt to be in this contemporary world. So that's why I think that for all of us, so that we don't need to be as skeptical as the, let's say, as expert who pretend to know everything. So that's for us. It is for all people who think and try to critically, let's say, analyze what's going on. It's absolutely important to also to be critical to yourself and to say that whether I used to think according to the books I read previously, or I need to be even more critical than I used to be. So this is one of the core approaches that we need to use today. Thank you.
Taras Kachka, thank you for this conversation.
Thank you.
This was a podcast Explain Ukraine by UkraineWorld, a multilingual website about Ukraine. My name is Volodymyr Yermolenko. I'm a Ukrainian philosopher, chief editor of UkraineWorld, and president of PEN Ukraine. My guest today was Taras Kachka, Ukraine's deputy economy minister and the country's trade representative. I invited him to discuss how the war influenced Ukraine's economy and trade and how Ukraine continues to resist. UkraineWorld is brought to you by Internews Ukraine, one of the largest Ukrainian media NGOs. You can support us at Patreon. You can also support our volunteer trips to the front lines at PayPal, ukraine.resisting@gmail.com. You can find these links in the description of this episode. Stay with us and stand with Ukraine.